The gleaming gold doors of the sterling grand, an emblem of luxury and class, promised perfect service befitting its renowned reputation. Yet as a young black high school student, fresh from a prestigious study abroad program, stepped through them, she was met not with warmth, but with scrutinizing glances, hesitant gestures, and a suspicious silence that echoed louder than any words. The white woman at the front desk, the manager, made her wait endlessly, continuously questioning the legitimacy of her reservation and treating her with subtle contempt. The situation escalated quickly as the manager accused her of stealing, called security, and attempted to force her out of the hotel as if she had no right to be there. But the student remained resolute, her silence a quiet storm, until the atmosphere in the lobby suddenly shifted. The main door burst open with force, silencing the entire space. A powerful woman strode in, authority radiating from every movement, her voice sharp as a blade. In that very moment, the manager realized she had made a grave mistake. The black car glided smoothly over the granite-paved street, the city lights reflecting off its shiny surface like a mirror. Sitting in the back seat, Eliana Brooks gazed out the window, watching the world pass by. Towering buildings with glowing windows shimmered like diamonds suspended in the night sky. New York City was welcoming her back after a year of studying abroad in Europe. A year that had completely changed her life. But she had no idea that it would be here, in this very place, that she would learn her harshest lesson. When the car stopped in front of the Sterling Grand, Eliana's heart raced in her chest. This was no ordinary hotel. It was a symbol of opulence, a place where only the elite dared to step. Tall white marble columns reached up to the sky. And inside, crystal chandeliers reflected through the glass doors, sparkling like thousands of stars. Even the air seemed thick with the scent of wealth and power. Eliana took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. A cold breeze brushed past her, tousling her smooth, dark curls. Her neat white button-up dress, paired with skinny jeans and designer sneakers, made her look both youthful and elegant, just like the style of a top student. She pulled her small suitcase behind her, her eyes filled with excitement. Though she had traveled to many places around the world, this was the first time she would personally experience this hotel. The hotel of her mother, Victoria Brooks, one of the most powerful women in the global hotel industry. But Eliana wasn't here as the daughter of a successful businesswoman. She was here simply as a guest who had made a reservation just like everyone else. As she approached the revolving glass door, she paused for a moment. A strange feeling swept over her, as if something were off. But she brushed it aside, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open, stepping inside. What she didn't know was that behind the grand marble walls, a nightmare awaited her. As soon as Eliana stepped through the glass doors of the Sterling Grand, she immediately sensed an invisible shift in the air, an unfamiliar energy not coming from the opulence of the place, but from the gazes upon her. She wasn't the only one to enter the lobby, yet it seemed like she was the only one being watched so closely. The doorman, a middle-aged man dressed in a luxurious navy blue uniform, hesitated for a second before opening the door for her, a gesture so slight it could hardly be called impolite, yet just subtle enough to make her notice the difference. When other white guests entered, he bowed his head respectfully and greeted them with formal courtesy. But with her, he simply stepped aside without a smile, without a word of welcome. The bellhops stood scattered around, their hands already gripping shiny luggage carts. But no one moved to offer help. Eliana glanced to the side and saw a white couple entering. Immediately, a young staff member rushed over to carry their luggage, greeting them with a cheerful smile and a polite salutation. The pang in her chest wasn't because she needed help, but because she knew exactly why no one had done the same for her. But she didn't let it show. Eliana took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her suitcase, straightened her back, and confidently strode to the reception desk. She was used to such looks. Ever since she was a child, when her mother took her to the extravagant parties of the elite, she understood that the color of her skin always made some people feel uncomfortable, uneasy, or even confused. But she had never let that define her. However, she didn't expect the person behind the desk to show her disapproval so clearly. Amanda Reeves, the shift manager at the hotel, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair neatly styled in a perfect bun, dark red painted nails, and a meticulously tailored dark blue suit, stood behind the reception. Before Eliana arrived, she had been smiling and chatting with the guest, her tone full of professionalism and politeness. But just in the fraction of a second when their eyes met, her expression shifted. The smile vanished, the warmth closed off. All that remained was a raised eyebrow. No greeting was offered, no, "Hello, how may I assist you?" as she had done for the previous guest. Only a heavy silence remained, a pause long enough for Eliana to sense the judgment in Amanda's gaze. That look wasn't just an evaluation of her appearance. It was a consideration, a silent question drilling into Amanda's mind. What is this girl doing here? It was the same look Eliana had grown accustomed to in luxury stores, where salespeople scrutinized her more closely than other customers, as if, should they slip for even a second, she might do something she wasn't supposed to. But Eliana didn't waver. She stood tall, placed both hands naturally on the counter, maintaining a composed but determined expression. If Amanda expected her to shy away or lower her head, she was mistaken. But Amanda wasn't easily shaken. She observed Eliana as though waiting for something, a hesitation, a sign that Eliana didn't belong. When she saw nothing, she slowly tapped a finger on the counter, then finally spoke. "What do you need?" Her words weren't friendly. They were reluctantly forced. Eliana tilted her head slightly. This tone wasn't in line with the hotel service standards that her mother had taught her, nor was it something any guest deserved to be met with. But she kept her tone calm and polite. "I have a reservation. My name is Eliana Brooks." Her voice was soft and courteous. When the name Brooks was spoken, Amanda's eyes narrowed. It was only a brief moment, but Eliana saw it clearly. Amanda recognized that surname, but instead of becoming friendlier, she seemed more cautious. Still, she extended her hand. "Could you show me your confirmation?" Not everyone had asked for their paperwork so immediately, but Eliana didn't want to argue. She pulled out her phone, opened the confirmation email, and handed it to Amanda with a swift motion. But instead of just glancing at it and inputting the details as usual, Amanda took the phone faster than necessary, scanning the text as if looking for a mistake. When she didn't find anything wrong, she placed the phone back on the counter with a clear lack of patience. Then, without saying a word, she turned back to her computer screen and began typing slowly, far too slowly. Eliana stared at her, recalling the countless times she had been treated like this, deliberately stalling, pretending to check something creating unnecessary delays just to make someone feel alienated, isolated. But she stood there quietly, observing. Something told her this wasn't just an ordinary delay. Amanda Reeves was testing her patience, and Eliana knew the game had officially begun. Amanda's fingers moved slowly across the keyboard with an unusually sluggish pace, as though each key press was a burdensome task she wished to avoid. On the screen, tabs opened and closed, and the cursor moved deliberately slow, creating the illusion of a careful search. But Eliana knew better. This wasn't caution. It was intentional delay. From the other side of the counter, she watched Amanda's face, her expression unchanged, yet her eyes skimmed the screen with an unmistakable lack of focus. She wasn't really searching. She was just stalling. Eliana tightened her grip on her handbag, but maintained an air of calm. She wasn't unfamiliar with this treatment, the way some people in power like to test if she was worthy of being served. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Amanda finally glanced up, her red lips pressed together as if she had just uncovered some kind of nuisance. "Are you sure you're not at the wrong hotel?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the way it was spoken, with clear skepticism, hidden disdain beneath the guise of politeness, made each word feel like a punch to Eliana's pride. For a brief moment, she felt the sting of humiliation rise in her chest, but she immediately swallowed it down, making sure her face betrayed no reaction. Instead, she smiled politely, but there was a sharpness in her eyes like the edge of a razor blade. "I'm sure. And I have the confirmation email right here." She took her phone from the counter, opened the booking email, and turned the screen towards Amanda, leaving no room for doubt. Amanda frowned, but didn't reach for the phone right away. It seemed as though she was trying to prolong the moment a little longer, to make Eliana feel like she didn't have the right to demand service, like any other guest. Finally, with a small, almost imperceptible sigh full of implied meaning, Amanda snatched the phone from Eliana's hand faster than necessary, her finger gliding across the screen as if searching for a mistake. It only took a few seconds to check, but she deliberately stretched it out to nearly a minute. Eliana could feel it, the way Amanda read each line in the email, unnecessarily glancing up at Eliana, then back down at the screen, as if waiting for a moment when she could turn the tables. At last, when no mistakes were found, Amanda dropped the phone back onto the counter as though she had completed some unpleasant task. "Hold on. I'll check the system." But Eliana knew she wasn't doing it immediately. Amanda didn't rush to enter the information. Instead, she glanced to the right of the counter where a young male staff member stood. Their eyes exchanged a brief, silent look, one that carried an unspoken complicity. Then, with a barely perceptible shrug, the other employee turned away, pretending to focus on his own screen. Eliana saw it all but said nothing. She was used to this game, and she knew what would come next. Amanda finally bent down to the keyboard, her fingers moving unnecessarily slow, typing each letter as if it were the first time she had ever used a computer. The moments passed, wasted. 30 seconds. Nothing changed. A minute. Still nothing. Eliana felt a flicker of frustration rising, but she didn't show it. She had played this game many times, and she knew the rules. She couldn't be the first to lose her composure. She had to wait for Amanda to make a mistake first, so she stood there silently, as patient as a stone statue, waiting to see what Amanda would do next. And then it came. Amanda exhaled softly, lifted her eyes from the screen, and said the very sentence Eliana had anticipated. "I don't see any booking under your name in the system." Eliana tightened her grip on her handbag. The game was officially on. Eliana took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration that was creeping up inside her chest. She knew exactly what was going on. This wasn't a system error, nor a mistake in the room booking process. This was a deliberate tactic, a sophisticated strategy that people like Amanda Reeves were far too skilled at. No need for insults, no need to yell or act rude. All she needed was one thing: time. And she was using time as a weapon to make Eliana feel like she didn't belong here. The moments of waiting dragged on slowly, like an invisible trial where Eliana had no right to defend herself, no one to back her up, and no one truly listening to her. 5 minutes passed. A middle-aged man, draped in an expensive cashmere coat, approached the desk. Amanda immediately flashed a polite smile, her voice softening as she greeted him. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. You have an executive reservation, correct? Let me grab your key right away." "No need to check the system, no need for any paperwork. Just 30 seconds. And the man had his key in hand, sent off with a bright smile. 10 minutes passed. A young Asian couple approached the desk. The woman held out her phone with a polite smile, her voice gentle. "Hello. I have a reservation under the name Lin Nguyen." Amanda skimmed through the screen quickly, entered the information, and smiled again with her professional demeanor. "Yes. Your room is ready. Here's your key card." No delays, no hesitation. 15 minutes passed. Eliana was still standing there as if she were a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. She could feel the eyes of the other guests. Some glanced at her briefly, then looked away, unwilling to get involved. Others assessed her as if she were standing in the wrong spot, as if she were disrupting the elegance of this place. From across the room, a group of servers passed by with trays of water, attending to each guest thoughtfully. Those sitting on the leather chairs nearby were served chilled water, garnished with a thin slice of lemon. Soft murmurs of conversation, quiet laughter echoed. But no one came near Eliana. She watched as a female staff member walked right past her, holding a tray filled with glasses. The woman's gaze flicked over Eliana for a moment before she ignored her, as if she hadn't seen her. Eliana furrowed her brows and took a step forward, her voice calm but sharp as she asked, "Excuse me, could I have a glass of water?" The server hesitated for a moment, then quickly looked over at Amanda, as if she needed permission to do something as simple as serving water to a guest. Amanda smirked, not even looking at Eliana. She merely shrugged and spoke in a cold, pointed tone. "Sorry, I think we're out of water." A clumsy lie to mask her real intent. From behind the desk, Amanda continued typing slowly, but there was a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes, as if she was savoring this moment, enjoying the opportunity to make Eliana feel small and powerless. But that wouldn't happen. Eliana didn't lower her head. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she looked directly at Amanda, keeping her gaze calm but sharp. A tense silence hung in the air before she gently asked again, this time her tone no longer naive. "Are you implying that I shouldn't be here?" For the first time during their exchange, Amanda flinched. In that brief moment, Eliana caught a glimpse of something. Surprise? A hint of unease buried in her eyes. But it lasted only a second before Amanda regained her composure. Leaning slightly on the counter, arms crossed, she smirked. "I just thought maybe you'd feel more comfortable at another hotel." The words hit the mark. No more beating around the bush. No more pretending to be polite. She wanted Eliana to leave. She wanted Eliana to feel like she didn't deserve to be here. She wanted Eliana to withdraw quietly to avoid the embarrassment. But Amanda made a huge mistake. Eliana wasn't the type to walk away silently. She looked straight at the woman before her, then slowly spoke. Each word deliberate and clear. "I'm not going anywhere." She straightened her back, her gaze steady, as if it were firmly planted on the marble floor beneath her. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. With just one simple sentence, she made the silence in the lobby feel heavier than ever. Amanda blinked, but said nothing. However, she wasn't about to give up this game so easily. If stalling didn't discourage Eliana, she would move to her next tactic. She subtly reached down beneath the counter, her finger pressing a small button, doing so with remarkable discretion. A second later, a door beside the counter swung open. 2 security guards stepped inside. This game was getting more serious than ever. Eliana could feel the undercurrent of tension swirling beneath the professional facade of the Sterling Grand. The luxurious surroundings suddenly became a trap, slowly closing in around her, a carefully orchestrated play in which she had just realized she was the unwitting lead character. She had waited long enough. Almost an hour had passed since she had entered this hotel as a legitimate guest, yet now she was still being treated like an outsider, an unwelcome intrusion. It was time to end this game. Eliana walked back to the front desk, no longer patient, her voice firmer but still controlled. "I've waited long enough. Check it again." But instead of a professional response, Amanda just gave a smirk, a knowing smile, before theatrically sighing as if she truly regretted having to do this. Then, in a soft yet cutting tone, she dropped a bombshell. "The issue isn't the reservation." The words hung in the air and the atmosphere shifted, a strange silence settling over the hotel lobby. Eliana frowned. She didn't understand. Amanda tilted her head, her hand gliding slowly across the counter as if pondering how to phrase her story most effectively. "We just received a report of a missing wallet." The statement rang out, calculated. Then she threw Eliana a look full of implications, like a verdict had just been delivered. "And coincidentally," she paused, letting the silence hang as everyone around her absorbed the meaning of her words. Then, with a small, victorious smile, she landed the final blow. "You've been here for an hour and haven't done a thing." The accusation, without any evidence, was uttered with absolute certainty. Certainty that immediately made those around them begin to speculate. Eliana froze. The feeling of humiliation crashed over her like a violent wave, not because she knew she was innocent, but because she knew exactly what was happening. This was no longer just a delay tactic. This was a setup. A baseless accusation. Amanda didn't just want to remove her from the hotel, she wanted to ruin her reputation in front of everyone. She wanted everyone to believe she wasn't just a nuisance. She was dangerous. Eliana opened her mouth to retort, but before she could say anything, Amanda pressed a button under the counter. The door next to the front desk swung open immediately. 2 security guards walked out, tall, dressed in black uniforms, faces emotionless, but clearly briefed on who they were supposed to handle. She wasn't given a chance to defend herself. No. One asked if she had done anything wrong. No one verified the information. All they needed was a nod from Amanda, and she had that ready. Amanda tilted her head slightly as though considering an unwanted situation, then turned to the two guards with a tone that was gentle, but carried absolute conviction. This person has been here for over an hour without a valid reason, and coincidentally there's just been a report of a missing item. No evidence, no investigation, but with what Amanda just said, Eliana was immediately guilty. One of the security guards, a tall man with cold eyes, stepped forward, his presence exuding clear intimidation. His hand reached out, ready to grasp Eliana's arm as if she had already been sentenced, as if she had no choice but to leave in disgrace. A wave of anger surged inside Eliana, stronger than any other emotion. She couldn't believe this was really happening, but she knew that if she reacted too strongly, one wrong move, a tug of her arm, a loud word, everyone would instantly believe she was guilty, because that's how this game worked. No one cared about the truth. They only cared about the story being told, and right now, Amanda was the storyteller. Eliana took a deep breath, holding her gaze steady as the guard approached, not backing down, not panicking. She wouldn't let them turn her into a criminal in this story, but before she could do anything, the revolving door of the hotel suddenly swung open forcefully. The sound of high heels clicking on marble floors rang sharply like a gunshot, signaling a change. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone in the hotel lobby froze, conversations were cut off, eyes quickly turned toward the entrance. Eliana instinctively turned her head, and as soon as she saw the woman walking in, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Her mother had arrived. Victoria Brooks. She didn't need to speak. With just her presence, the entire hotel seemed to tremble, no one daring to move. Her gaze was as cold as ice, her face as hard as stone, but the most terrifying thing was the absolute silence that surrounded her. Amanda suddenly froze, her hand resting on the counter, trembling slightly, and in that fleeting moment, Eliana realized something important. Amanda knew who she was, and for the first time that evening she was afraid. The atmosphere in the hotel lobby suddenly changed. Where before the humiliation directed at Eliana was wrapped in the sweet veneer of polite words and subtle delays, now it had turned into a public attack. Two security guards approached, their movements stiff, broad-shouldered, eyes cold, as though they had identified their target the moment they appeared. They didn't ask questions, didn't verify, didn't consider if there had been any misunderstanding. They just acted. One of them, a tall man with a closely cropped haircut and an expressionless gaze, stepped in front of Eliana and without hesitation reached out and gripped her arm tightly. "You need to leave," his voice rang out. Not loud, but with such absolute certainty in each word that it cut off any potential protest before it even left Eliana's mouth. She could feel the tightness on her arm, the invisible oppression of a system that had decided she was in the wrong, even though she hadn't done anything. But Eliana was not one to accept defeat easily. She immediately jerked her arm back, no fear, no panic. Her voice rang out, not loud but clear and firm, like a blade. "I'm not going anywhere." Her resistance made the whole space freeze for a few seconds. People around her who had been silently observing with the detached indifference of strangers now began to truly pay attention. Whispers started to rise and eyes turned toward her, no longer just curious, but laced with an implicit judgment. And that was exactly what Amanda wanted. Amanda Reeves wasn't surprised. She had predicted Eliana's reaction. She wanted Eliana to resist. She needed Eliana to do so because as long as Eliana expressed any anger, as long as she didn't leave quietly, the story Amanda was trying to weave would become truth in the eyes of the crowd. A smile briefly crossed her lips. Then she sighed dramatically, tilting her head toward the security guard and speaking in a tone as though she were dealing with a very awkward situation. "She's being too aggressive. We need to ensure the safety of our guests." Just one sentence. But it carried enough venom to twist the situation in the direction Amanda wanted. No longer a student denied service, no longer a customer trying to reclaim her rights. Now, in the eyes of those around her, Eliana had become a threat, and she knew how this story would play out if she wasn't careful. Eliana could feel the anger flare up in her chest. It wasn't just the anger of being mistreated. It was the anger of hundreds, thousands of times before, when people like her were suspected, mistreated, accused unjustly simply because of the color of their skin. But she knew she couldn't lose control. She knew that the moment she raised her hand too quickly, the moment her voice grew louder, the moment she let her emotions take over, Amanda would have everything she needed to make her the villain. She took a deep breath, kept her gaze fixed on Amanda, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as cold steel. "I'm not the problem here, and you know that." The confidence in her voice made Amanda pause for just a split second. Eliana noticed that although Amanda had prepared every scenario to paint her as the troublemaker, there was one thing she hadn't predicted: Eliana's calm. She didn't panic, she didn't shout, she didn't beg. She just stood there looking straight into Amanda's eyes, refusing to be subdued. But Amanda wasn't giving up yet. She turned to the security guard, shrugging in apparent helplessness, then gestured toward Eliana with the tilt of her chin. "This is why I don't feel comfortable with her here. Look, she's uncooperative, causing a disruption in our hotel lobby. Please, get her out before this goes too far." And that was the moment Eliana knew that if she didn't act right now, they would truly drag her out of here. She needed to fight back. She needed to regain control of this situation before it slipped entirely out of her grasp. And just as she was considering her next move, the hotel's large doors suddenly swung open forcefully. The sound of high heels echoed on the marble floor, each step decisive, sharp, like a verdict being handed down. No one spoke, but the entire room seemed to freeze in an instant. Eliana looked up, and she saw a familiar figure entering. Powerful, dignified, in full control. Victoria Brooks, her mother. The woman who would never tolerate injustice, the woman who would never allow anyone to humiliate her daughter. And for the first time that evening, Eliana knew she wasn't fighting alone anymore. The large door of the Sterling Grand Hotel swung open, not with a gentle push, but with a powerful, decisive motion, as if the very space had to give way for the person entering. The sharp click of high heels echoed across the marble floor, each step moving directly toward the center of the chaos, quietly spreading through the hotel lobby. No one spoke, but everyone could feel the immediate shift. Conversations that had been murmuring abruptly ceased, and glances that had been avoiding one another instinctively turned toward the entrance. Victoria Brooks walked in. Her form-fitting red suit dress clung to her tall frame, reflecting the light from the crystal chandelier overhead, turning her into a flame in the midst of an atmosphere frozen by the injustices that filled the room. Her sharp eyes scanned the space without a hint of hesitation or uncertainty in her stride. She didn't need to ask what had happened. Just a glance was enough to understand. The way Eliana stood there, her hands still clenched after being held tight, the gaze of her daughter, devoid of weakness or panic, but filled with a suppressed anger, an injustice that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. The two security officers still stood in their positions, one of them still not fully relaxing their posture. The crowd of guests in the lobby, some bewildered, others intrigued, realized they were about to witness something rare in such a place. And right at the reception desk, Amanda Reeves stood, her lips stretched into a forced smile, but a hint of anxiety flickered in her eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, Victoria pointed straight at the security officer, her voice low, cold, but carrying an undeniable authority that filled the air. "Let her go now." Just 4 words. But they rang out like a verdict. There were no pleas, no explanations, and no room for negotiation. It wasn't a request. It was an order, a declaration that left no space for defiance. The entire lobby seemed to tighten, stretched taut by an invisible thread. The two security guards exchanged a brief but obvious glance, a moment of hesitation. They didn't know who Victoria Brooks was, but they could feel the change in the air, could sense the gaze of other staff members, of the guests watching. And above all, they felt the hesitation creeping into their minds. A part of them wanted to follow through with the previous order, but another part warned them that they might be dealing with someone they shouldn't. Amanda noticed this, and she couldn't let the situation spiral out of control. She forced herself to regain composure, keeping the smile on her face, though it was stiff, her voice adopting the practiced professional tone she'd used many times before. "Miss Brooks, I can explain—" Victoria didn't even glance at her. Not for a second. She didn't care about justifications, didn't care for the empty explanations she knew would only be a string of excuses to cover up a glaring mistake. Her eyes remained locked on the security officer, her tone unchanged. "I said let her go. Don't ask me anything. Don't wait for anyone else's orders. Don't think. Immediately." This time there was no hesitation. The two security guards released their hold without a word. They stepped back, though no one had commanded them to do so, but Victoria's presence made it impossible for them to do otherwise. Eliana felt the release on her arm, a sense of relief passing through her, but it didn't ease the frustration still burning in her chest. She said nothing, standing tall, her gaze firm as she locked eyes with her mother. There was no fear, no dependence, only a silent understanding between them. They didn't need words because they both knew exactly what was happening. But Amanda couldn't stay silent any longer. She realized the situation was slipping away from her, realizing everything was no longer going according to her carefully laid plan. She couldn't let this continue any further, so she had to regain control, her voice softening but still maintaining an air of command. "Miss Brooks, I'm afraid there's been a small misunderstanding. My staff was just following security protocol. We received a report about a missing item, and according to hotel policy, we have a responsibility—" Her words were cut off when Victoria finally turned her gaze to Amanda. The way she looked at her wasn't with sudden anger or outward fury, but with a slow, analytical assessment. a look that made Amanda feel completely exposed. Victoria didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to act aggressively. She simply stood there, looking at Amanda with a piercing coldness that made her feel as though she were standing before a judge in the final trial of her life. "The only misunderstanding here," Victoria's voice rang out, each word slow, measured, yet heavy with weight, "is that you think you have the right to treat my guest this way without facing any consequences." A simple sentence, but it didn't need to be any longer. And in that moment, Amanda realized she had no way out. Amanda Reeves felt her entire body tense up, every muscle in her face straining to suppress a panic she knew she couldn't let show. She had tried to control the situation from the start, deliberately stalling for time, creating a plausible story to make Eliana Brooks seem suspicious, unworthy of standing in the hotel lobby. But now, everything she had built was crumbling before her eyes. Victoria Brooks kept staring at her, her gaze unwavering, not filled with the explosive anger Amanda had anticipated, nor with impatience. In fact, it was that calm demeanor that was the most terrifying. It gave Amanda no opportunity to turn the situation around, no room to manipulate the story the way she wanted. Mrs. Brooks didn't need to prove anything to anyone, because she knew the truth was on her side, and she was simply waiting for it to be revealed. "Check the VIP system." Her voice rang out, steady and composed, yet carrying an undeniable weight. Those words echoed like a command across the room, making everyone around her instinctively slow their breath. Amanda furrowed her brow, clutching her hands tightly under the desk to keep herself from trembling. She couldn't refuse that order, couldn't make excuses about the system malfunctioning, couldn't keep dragging out the time any longer. All she could do now was follow Victoria Brooks's directive, because all eyes in the hotel lobby were on her, waiting for the result. She swallowed hard, slowly turning to the computer screen in front of her. Her dark, red, manicured fingers moved across the keyboard, but this time there was no deliberate slowness. She no longer had the luxury of delay. She had to face the truth. Each key press rang out clearly in the unnerving silence of the lobby. On the screen, the search command appeared. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then the text appeared, clear and indisputable. "Eliana Brooks, VIP reservation." The room seemed to stretch out in a moment of total stillness. The crowd gasped. A few guests whispered among themselves, no longer merely curious but genuinely astonished. They had witnessed everything from the beginning, heard how Amanda had questioned, how she had deliberately shown doubt, how she had stalled as if Eliana weren't a legitimate guest, but just someone attempting to sneak in. But now they all had to face an undeniable truth. Eliana hadn't just reserved a room, she had reserved a VIP room, one of the most exclusive in the hotel. Amanda turned pale. She stood there, frozen, her eyes locked on the screen as if a part of her had frozen when the truth appeared before her. Eliana stared at the screen, her eyes reflecting the text, not with surprise, but with a firm confirmation. She had known from the start. She had never doubted that her reservation was valid. But seeing the surrounding people start to realize the truth, watching Amanda struggle to hide her panic, that was the moment of real satisfaction for her. Victoria remained still, unmoved, her expression unreadable, but her gaze was sharp like a blade, locking onto Amanda as if she were dissecting every layer of her deception to reveal the truth beneath. "You said there was no reservation?" Mrs. Brooks's voice cut through the air, not loud, but full of weight. You insisted my daughter's name wasn't in the system. You made her wait in the lobby for almost an hour, and when she asked for a check, you refused. You didn't want to do it because you didn't want her here. Amanda opened her mouth to say something, but Mrs. Brooks cut her off. And when she didn't leave the way you wanted, you decided to fabricate a story, an unfounded accusation. You accused her of being a thief. You called security. You did all that just to protect what? To protect the thought in your mind that a girl like her didn't belong here? Her voice didn't rise in anger, yet every word was like a sharp knife cutting through the air, slicing through the facade Amanda had desperately tried to hold on to. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Amanda looked genuinely panicked. She swallowed, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of the counter, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Mrs. Brooks, I really don't call my name, Victoria interrupted, her voice so sharp that Amanda immediately fell silent. I don't care about your excuses. I don't care what you think. I care about one thing only. You deliberately humiliated my daughter in this hotel, knowing full well she had every right to be here, just like anyone else. The silence stretched for a few more seconds, long enough for Amanda to feel the full weight of the consequences bearing down on her. Finally, Victoria moved. She turned to the security guard, her voice sharper than ever. The only person who doesn't belong here, she said, each word emphasized like a final nail in the coffin Amanda had built for herself, is her. Amanda Reeves inhaled sharply, her face drained of color. Mrs. Brooks had just passed judgment, and there was no way Amanda could turn this around now. Victoria Brooks was in no rush. She didn't need to raise her voice, nor did she need to threaten, because she knew that at this moment, Amanda Reeves had completely lost control. She could try to stand tall, try to hide the trembling of her hands, but nothing could change the fact that this game was over. You said my daughter has no room? Victoria's voice rang out slowly, sharply, without a hint of hesitation. Amanda took a quick breath, but the air in the room suddenly became so thick, as if even breathing had become difficult. She looked down at the keyboard, as though searching for an explanation, a reasonable excuse to salvage the situation. But there was nothing. All she had was the truth, and that truth could not be bent. I don't know. Amanda's words broke apart the moment they left her lips, as if she herself didn't believe them. Victoria didn't give her the chance to continue defending herself. She cut in, her voice not loud, but carrying an absolute finality, leaving no room for negotiation. You have 10 minutes to leave. A short sentence, but heavy as a sentence of death. Otherwise, she continued, her gaze never wavering, I'll have security escort you out, just as you did with my daughter. Amanda turned pale. Victoria's words struck like a fatal blow, not only to her career, but to the honor Amanda had struggled to build. Being fired was one thing, but being kicked out of the hotel like a criminal in front of staff and other guests was the greatest humiliation she could imagine. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She wanted to protest, wanted to say that she was just following protocol, wanted to offer any excuse to mitigate the consequences, but nothing could save her now. She had made the gravest mistake possible, offending the wrong person. No one spoke up for her. Not a single staff member stepped in to defend her. Even the two security guards who had been ready to drag Eliana out just moments before now stood there in silence, realizing that they had become part of an injustice that they could never undo. The hotel lobby remained silent, but that silence was no longer the indifference it had been before. It was tension. It was witness. It was the moment when everyone realized they too were involved in something bigger than themselves. Amanda lowered her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. She had no other choice but to accept her fate. Staggering, she turned and made her way to the staff room, each step heavy and slow, as though she were walking on unstable ground. No one said a word. No one tried to stop her. When the door to the staff room closed behind her, an invisible cold wind seemed to sweep through the hotel lobby, carrying away all remnants of arrogance, of pretense, of the power Amanda had once held. The game was over, but the storm it had caused was still raging. Victoria Brooks stood still for a long moment after Amanda disappeared through the staff room door. The hotel lobby remained engulfed in a heavy silence. Not the kind of silence typical of a luxurious, elegant place, but the kind that follows an unexpected earthquake, shocking, unsettled, and filled with tension. The staff near the front desk avoided Victoria's gaze. Some bending down to focus on the computer screens in front of them, others seemingly busy with stacks of papers or ledgers, though they all knew they couldn't escape the question that was about to come. Victoria turned her eyes, scanning the room, cold and sharp, but not in a burst of anger. Instead, they held a scrutinizing, calculating look as though she were weighing and considering, determining who among them was worthy of staying and who didn't deserve the sterling grand uniform. She locked eyes with an older man standing near the entrance to the staff hallway, William Calloway, the hotel's senior manager. His face was pale, hands clasped in front of him as though he were silently praying for something. "How many times has this happened?" Her voice rang out, not too loud, but carrying the weight of a statement that seemed to come down from a great height. No one answered because everyone knew that the real answer was unacceptable, because everyone knew that this wasn't the first time. William Calloway swallowed nervously, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally. Someone who could share the weight of this question with him. But there was no one. Everyone was waiting to see how he would react. The air grew even more tense. The staff in the lobby now understood. This was not just an issue between a guest and a front desk manager. This was a purge. Finally, Calloway slowly spoke, his voice dry. "Miss Brooks, I can't say for sure, but this isn't uncommon, is it?" Victoria interrupted, not allowing him the chance to offer any excuses. Calloway looked flustered, his hands clenching for a moment before they dropped by his sides, as if he knew nothing could change the situation now. "No, ma'am," he admitted, his voice growing smaller as though he too felt the shame in saying it out loud. Victoria nodded as if her suspicions had been confirmed, then turned back to address the entire staff in the lobby. Not just the ones at the front desk, but also the servers, bellmen, security officers, everyone who had been there, who had seen what happened, and had remained silent and done nothing. All staff must undergo anti-discrimination training. Anyone who disagrees can leave immediately. No one dared to object, not a single soul, because they all knew this wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Victoria lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping over each person as though testing them, waiting to see who had the courage to stand up and oppose her, to challenge her decision. But all she received in return was complete silence, because they all understood that Victoria Brooks was not a woman of empty words. Those who opposed would have no place here. Those who felt offended by this decision, who believed they had the right to act as they pleased without changing, could leave right now. But no one stepped forward. Not a single staff member had the courage to risk their job just to cling to outdated beliefs. Victoria remained silent for a few more seconds, as though giving her message enough time to sink in. Then she turned to Calloway again, and this time her voice was no longer sharp, but cold in a different way. A way that signaled this was not the end. Mr. Calloway, I want a full report on similar incidents that have occurred in the last 3 years, including a list of involved staff, affected guests, and how the hotel handled them. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Calloway barely dared to breathe. Yes, ma'am, he whispered, lowering his head, knowing he had no right to refuse. Victoria nodded in satisfaction, then glanced at a young receptionist standing nearby, the girl who probably never imagined she'd be caught up in such a situation. Give me my daughter's room key, she said. The receptionist immediately nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard, as though she had just received the most important order of her life. Within seconds, a room key was placed on the counter with the utmost respect. Victoria took it without so much as a glance at Amanda, who had vanished, or the other staff members still frozen in shock from the unsettling event. She didn't need to. She knew that from this moment on, the Sterling Grand Hotel would never be the same. She turned to her daughter, her expression softening for a brief moment, a tenderness only Eliana would notice. Let's go, she said quietly. Eliana nodded, tightening her grip on her handbag just a little more, then pulled her suitcase alongside her mother. They walked toward the elevator, their steps powerful, never looking back. The golden doors of the elevator slid shut behind them, and when the doors closed, everyone left in the hotel lobby knew that the old era of the Sterling Grand had ended, and a new era had just begun. The doors of the Sterling Grand elevator closed behind Victoria and Eliana, but the storm they left behind continued to stir every corner of the hotel. The staff still standing in the lobby didn't speak a word to each other, but everyone understood that an era had just ended, and a new one had begun. Inside the elevator, Eliana stood upright, her eyes focused on the control panel, but her mind was still reeling from what had just happened. She was not one to be easily defeated, but the experience had shown her the harsh truth about the world she lived in, a world where no matter how accomplished she was, or how she had been raised by one of the most powerful women in the hotel industry, she could still be doubted, humiliated, and treated like an outsider. But she was no longer a victim. She was a symbol of change. Victoria stood beside her daughter, her gaze no longer sharp as it had been when facing the staff in the lobby, but instead contemplative, with the careful, thoughtful look of someone accustomed to building and tearing down systems that no longer served their purpose. When the elevator reached their floor, she said nothing, simply stepping out, leaving Eliana to follow. When the VIP room door closed behind the two of them, Victoria sat down in a chair, crossing her arms over her chest, and stared at her daughter for a long while. The little girl she once knew was now a grown young woman, but she still saw a trace of lingering pain in Eliana's eyes, even though she didn't speak of it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Her tone no longer the commanding voice of a powerful businesswoman who had just purged the hotel system, but that of a mother. Eliana didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the window, looking down at the city sprawling beneath her, the lights reflecting like jewels against the dark sky. After a long while, she exhaled quietly. "I hate it," she said slowly, her voice lacking bitterness or resentment, only deep disappointment. "Not just because of how they treated me, but because this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last." Victoria was not surprised by the answer. She had lived through many years in the hotel industry, witnessing countless times when people of their skin color were treated differently, no matter how talented, powerful, or wealthy they were. "But this time will be the last," she said with certainty. Eliana turned around, looking at her mother with a hint of surprise. "The last time?" Victoria nodded. "For you? For others like you? For anyone who steps into Sterling Grand from now on. The system is too outdated, and it's time for it to change." Eliana listened, allowing her mother's words to sink into her thoughts. The next morning, the real storm began. Victoria summoned the entire hotel management team for an emergency meeting. Branch directors, department heads, senior managers, everyone was present in the large meeting room, the air thick with tension. "Starting today," Victoria declared, her voice not carrying a threat, but an unshakable certainty, "this hotel will no longer be a place that tolerates any form of discrimination, in any way." She continued, outlining the new policies that would take effect immediately. "Every hotel employee, from reception to senior management, must participate in mandatory training on anti-discrimination, unconscious bias, and how to serve guests with absolute fairness. An anonymous reporting channel will be established, allowing employees to report any inappropriate behavior without fear of retaliation. Any employee found engaging in racist or biased behavior in serving guests will be suspended immediately and may face termination. A new internal oversight department will be set up to monitor and ensure that these policies are not just words on paper, but are implemented in every detail of hotel service." The room fell silent as she finished speaking. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one dared to speak. They all knew that when Victoria Brooks said something, it became reality. William Calloway, the senior hotel manager, cleared his throat and cautiously spoke, as though he was trying to choose his words carefully to avoid being swept up in this purge. "Miss Brooks, I understand that these changes are important, but it may take some time for the staff to adjust." Victoria looked directly at him, her gaze causing anyone to stiffen. "They can adapt quickly or they can leave. We don't have time to wait." No one dared to say anything more. And then a series of unprecedented changes began in the history of Sterling Grand. Eliana was no longer just a girl who had been treated unfairly. She became a symbol of change. Her name was no longer just in the VIP booking system. It became the driving force behind a reform, a turning point that made the entire hotel reconsider how they had operated for so many years. The staff who had, ignored her that day were now forced to relearn how to serve guests fairly. Those who had once quietly shown favoritism now faced consequences if they refused to change. The press began to take notice. Articles about the purge at Sterling Grand began circulating on business news sites. Some longtime hotel employees expressed discomfort with these changes, but they had no power to stop it. And through it all, Eliana quietly observed, but this time, not with helplessness or anger. She saw clearly that her mother was not only protecting her, she was changing an entire system so that others wouldn't have to go through what Eliana had experienced the night before. And while that couldn't completely erase what had happened to her, it gave her a strength she had never felt before. A new era had begun, and she was a part of it. Victoria Brooks walked out of the meeting room where she had just announced bold changes to the hotel system. The vast corridor of the executive floor was eerily quiet, the only sound being the echo of her footsteps on the cold marble floor. She had walked through corridors like this thousands of times before, in negotiations, restructurings, billion-dollar deals. But this time she wasn't just fighting to protect the corporation's reputation, she was fighting to protect her daughter. Eliana sat on a long chair by the large window, where the morning sunlight streamed through the Gariseng gobaraso solein zapreli keys. Gasate. Casting a gentle light on her face that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She was no longer angry, no longer bitter as she had been the night before, but something still lingered inside her. Something that, no matter what changes took place, could not be easily erased. Victoria walked up slowly, not in a rush, not showing impatience when facing her daughter. She was no longer the powerful businesswoman, no longer the strong woman who had just shaken up an old system. She was simply a mother. She slowly sat down beside her daughter without any overt gestures, simply being there to share this moment with her. "Are you okay?" Her voice was low, no longer firm as when speaking in front of the board, but with a particular tenderness, reserved only for Eliana. The young woman took a deep breath, as if trying to regain her composure after a long night drowned in complicated emotions. To her, what had happened wasn't just a simple confrontation, but a slap in the face of reality, a painful reminder that no matter how hard she tried, the world would still see her differently just because of the color of her skin. But when she looked into her mother's eyes where a steadfast resilience was reflected, she felt something rise in her chest. For the first time that day, she felt truly respected. She nodded, her voice soft, but carrying a certainty she didn't even realize she had. "I'm okay now, Mom." Victoria studied her daughter for a few seconds, then nodded slowly, as though she had already anticipated this answer. "You know," she said slowly, her eyes reflecting a deep contemplation as she gazed out at the cityscape below. "When I was your age, I went through things like this. The feeling of walking into a place where you should be welcomed, but instead you're treated like a stranger." Eliana listened silently, knowing that her mother rarely spoke of her past. "Back then, I didn't have anyone to stand up for me," Victoria continued, her voice no longer sharp as when facing Amanda Reeves, but filled with a quiet strength. "I had to learn how to stand up for myself, to prove my worth, not just by words, but by actions. But you're different, Eliana. You don't have to fight this alone. You have me, and you have an entire generation of black women who fought so that you could be where you are today." Eliana looked at her mother for the first time, realizing she wasn't alone in this fight. "Do you regret what you just did?" she asked, not because she doubted her mother, but because she wanted to understand her thoughts more deeply. Victoria smiled softly, a smile that carried no regret, only a deep sense of satisfaction. "Regret? Do you think I regret teaching someone like Amanda Reeves a lesson? She shook her head. No, I don't regret it. The only thing I regret is that I didn't do it sooner. Eliana smiled softly, a smile light, but filled with a sense of liberation. She had once thought that things like this could only end in shame, in walking away quietly. But now she understood that not everyone had the right to turn her into a victim, unless she allowed it. She leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, a gesture she hadn't made since she was young. Victoria didn't say anything, simply wrapping her arms around her daughter, offering an invisible but powerful protection. Outside the window, the sun began to rise higher, illuminating the city beneath them. But for Eliana, the true light didn't come from the sun. It came from the strength she had just found within herself. Mother and daughter stepped into the elevator, leaving behind a hotel that had just experienced an earthquake, a place that would never be the same again. The metal doors silently closed, reflecting their image on the shiny surface. Eliana briefly glanced at herself in the reflection, feeling as though she had just stepped out of a battle she never wanted to be a part of, but one she had to face to the end. Yet she no longer felt the loneliness or helplessness she had felt the night before. Victoria stood beside her daughter, her eyes still sharp, yet a little more relaxed now that everything had fallen into place. As the elevator began to descend, she crossed her arms over her chest, a habit Eliana knew well whenever her mother was deep in thought about the next steps to take. Eliana, she said slowly, not in the voice of a worried mother, but in the tone of a mentor, someone who understood that her daughter had entered a new phase in her life. Do you realize what you just did? Eliana turned to look at her brow furrowed at the unexpected question. You didn't walk away, Victoria continued, not waiting for an answer. You didn't let them turn you into a victim. You didn't let others decide your worth. You stood your ground, even when they tried to make you feel like you didn't belong here. Eliana fell silent, letting those words sink deep into her thoughts. She hadn't walked away. She hadn't surrendered. There were moments when she felt angry, hurt, but never once did she allow that injustice to consume her. She had stayed, fought by holding on to herself, not letting anger cloud her judgment, not letting Amanda's humiliation break her self-respect. And most importantly, she had reclaimed justice, not just for herself, but for those who would come after her, who would step into that hotel without facing the same doubtful looks she had once endured. So, what did I change? She asked, almost as a way to reaffirm the lesson she had just learned. Victoria smiled faintly, but her smile carried the weight of someone who had lived through much. You changed the way people see you, the way they see people like you. Sometimes change doesn't come from big things, but from a moment when someone decides not to bow their head. Eliana nodded softly. She knew her mother was right. Things like this had been happening for decades, centuries, and would continue to happen. But each time someone dared to stand up, dared to ask questions, dared to refuse to accept things as they were, the world would change just a little bit. The elevator continued to slide down, each floor passing by like pages in a book nearing its end. But for Eliana, this was not the end. This was just the beginning. She was no longer the girl denied entry into a lavish hotel. No longer a guest treated with suspicion simply because of the color of her skin. She was someone who had left her mark, even if only for one night. but it was a mark that could never be erased. And from now on, she would walk her path with a different posture. The elevator doors opened as they reached the ground floor. No one in the lobby dared to look at her with scrutiny anymore. No one doubted whether she belonged here or not, because now they knew. Sterling Grand will never be the same again. The hotel's space still retains its magnificent beauty, with crystal chandeliers shining down from the ceiling, red carpet stretching across the marble floors, and employees in neatly pressed uniforms. But something has changed. Not in the furnishings, not in the extravagant arrangements, but in the atmosphere, in the eyes of the people present here. Last night's event wasn't just an argument between a guest and the hotel manager, not just a lesson for an individual. It was a cut into the outdated system that had been in place for far too long, a sign of the shifting boundaries that no one had dared cross before. From now on, no one can walk through the doors of this hotel without knowing the name Eliana Brooks. No one can continue their old ways of thinking without hesitating at the consequences. And above all, no one can treat guests with bias or unconscious prejudices without fearing they'll be the next one discarded. Eliana stood still for a moment, sensing the change and how those around her looked at her. No more scrutinizing glances, no more unspoken distance. Only a clear recognition that she was no longer just an unknown young woman, but the one who had sparked a change that they would all have to adapt to. She glanced at her mother. Victoria Brooks said nothing, but in her eyes was a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't just taught those who had looked down on her daughter a lesson. She had laid the gleaming gold doors of the Sterling Grand, an emblem of luxury and class, promised perfect service befitting its renowned reputation. Yet, as a young black high school student fresh from a prestigious study abroad program stepped through them, she was met not with warmth, but with scrutinizing glances, hesitant gestures, and a suspicious silence that echoed louder than any words. The white woman at the front desk, the manager, made her wait endlessly, continuously questioning the legitimacy of her reservation and treating her with subtle contempt. The situation escalated quickly as the manager accused her of stealing, called security, and attempted to force her out of the hotel as if she had no right to be there. But the student remained resolute, her silence a quiet storm, until the atmosphere in the lobby suddenly shifted. The main door burst open with force, silencing the entire space. A powerful woman strode in, authority radiating from every movement, her voice sharp as a blade. In that very moment, the manager realized she had made a grave mistake. The black car glided smoothly over the granite-paved street, the city lights reflecting off its shiny surface like a mirror. Sitting in the back seat, Eliana Brooks gazed out the window, watching the world pass by. Towering buildings with glowing windows shimmered like diamonds suspended in the night sky. New York City was welcoming her back after a year of studying abroad in Europe, a year that had completely changed her life. But she had no idea that it would be here, in this very place, that she would learn her harshest lesson. When the car stopped in front of the Sterling Grand, Eliana's heart raced in her chest. This was no ordinary hotel. It was a symbol of opulence, a place where only the elite dared to step. Tall, white marble columns reached up to the sky, and inside, crystal chandeliers reflected through the glass doors, sparkling like thousands of stars. Even the air seemed thick with the scent of wealth and power. Eliana took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. A cold breeze brushed past her, tousling her smooth, dark curls. Her neat white button-up dress, paired with skinny jeans and designer sneakers, made her look both youthful and elegant, just like the style of a top student. She pulled her small suitcase behind her, her eyes filled with excitement. Though she had traveled to many places around the world, this was the first time she would personally experience this hotel, the hotel of her mother, Victoria Brooks, one of the most powerful women in the global hotel industry. But Eliana wasn't here as the daughter of a successful businesswoman. She was here simply as a guest who had made a reservation just like everyone else. As she approached the revolving glass door, she paused for a moment. A strange feeling swept over her, as if something were off, but she brushed it aside, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open, stepping inside. What she didn't know was that behind the grand marble walls, a nightmare awaited her. As soon as Eliana stepped through the glass doors of the Sterling Grand, she immediately sensed an invisible shift in the air, an unfamiliar energy not coming from the opulence of the place, but from the gazes upon her. She wasn't the only one to enter the lobby, yet it seemed like she was the only one being watched so closely. The doorman, a middle-aged man dressed in a luxurious navy blue uniform, hesitated for a second before opening the door for her. A gesture so slight it could hardly be called impolite, yet just subtle enough to make her notice the difference. When other white guests entered, he bowed his head respectfully and greeted them with formal courtesy. But with her, he simply stepped aside without a smile, without a word of welcome. The bellhops stood scattered around, their hands already gripping shiny luggage carts, but no one moved to offer help. Eliana glanced to the side and saw a white couple entering. Immediately, a young staff member rushed over to carry their luggage, greeting them with a cheerful smile and a polite salutation. The pang in her chest wasn't because she needed help, but because she knew exactly why no one had done the same for her. But she didn't let it show. Eliana took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her suitcase, straightened her back, and confidently strode to the reception desk. She was used to such looks. Ever since she was a child, when her mother took her to the extravagant parties of the elite, she understood that the color of her skin always made some people feel uncomfortable, uneasy, or even confused. But she had never let that define her. However, she didn't expect the person behind the desk to show her disapproval so clearly. Amanda Reeves, the shift manager at the hotel, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair neatly styled in a perfect bun, dark, red, painted nails, and a meticulously tailored dark blue suit, stood behind the reception. Before Eliana arrived, she had been smiling and chatting with the guest, her tone full of professionalism and politeness. But just in the fraction of a second when their eyes met, her expression shifted. The smile vanished. The warmth closed off. All that remained was a raised eyebrow. No greeting I was offered. No, "Hello, how may I assist you?" as she had done for the previous guest. Only a heavy silence remained, a pause long enough for Eliana to sense the judgment in Amanda's gaze. That look wasn't just an evaluation of her appearance, it was a consideration, a silent question drilling into Amanda's mind. What is this girl doing here? It was the same look Eliana had grown accustomed to in luxury stores, where salespeople scrutinized her more closely than other customers, as if, should they slip for even a second, she might do something she wasn't supposed to. But Eliana didn't waver. She stood tall, placed both hands naturally on the counter, maintaining a composed but determined expression. If Amanda expected her to shy away or lower her head, she was mistaken. But Amanda wasn't easily shaken. She observed Eliana as though waiting for something, a hesitation, a sign that Eliana didn't belong. When she saw nothing, she slowly tapped a finger on the counter, then finally spoke. "What do you need?" Her words weren't friendly. They were reluctantly forced. Eliana tilted her head slightly. This tone wasn't in line with the